y'all ready to rock and roll? Yeah? Are we rocking and rolling? All right. So let's do a quick little review from yesterday, and then we are going to jump into organelles today. Today's another short and sweet lesson, and then I will set you loose to work on your assignments. So yesterday we talked about the types of cells. How many are there? 2. What are they? Yep, prokaryotes and eukaryotes. So pro means and U means true. Okay, so pro means no, U means true. So what 2 things do we know about a prokaryote? No nucleus. And what's the other major thing? No nucleus and no what? Membrane-bound organelles, right. Okay, so no nucleus, no membrane-bound organelles. What are the 2 things we know of a eukaryote? Has a nucleus and membrane-bound organelles, that's correct. So which of the 2 is smaller? So that means the eukaryote is bigger, okay. Which one is complex? A eukaryote, so that means that a prokaryote is much more simple. Give me 2 examples of a eukaryote. Yep, animal and plant. Those are the 2 that we are going to focus on. Okay? Give me an example of a prokaryote. Bacteria, that's right. Okay? What do we know that all cells have? Yes. And a cell membrane, that's right. Okay? So they all have DNA and a cell membrane. Okay? So, how does a prokaryote have DNA if they don't have a nucleus? It's jumbled up in the center there, okay? So there's nothing that is holding it in. You get everything? Yeah? Okay, so today we are going to talk about organelles. So yesterday we've already seen this. This looks a little bit familiar, yes? So cells make up tissues, tissues make up an organ, organs make up an organ system, and all of our organ systems make an organism, make us, okay? All right, so cells are the basic unit of life, and these are the 3 that we will focus on. We talked about a bacterial cell a little bit yesterday with a prokaryote, and then up here you see both an animal cell and a plant cell. What did we say about an animal cell and a plant cell yesterday? Animal cells are more, and a plant cell is more square, okay? We saw this in a video that nobody liked yesterday. Nobody laughed. Mr. Roman and I thought it was funny though. So these are the 3 parts of the cell theory. All living things are composed of cells. Cells are the basic units of structure and function, and new cells are produced from existing cells. Okay? So all living things composed of cells. We saw this when we talked about the what? What was the first thing we did in here? Characteristics of life, okay? Cells are the basic units of structure and function, and we're going to see that going through the organelles. And last, new cells are produced from existing cells. So if you cut yourself, what happens? You bleed, right? But it eventually does what? It stops, right? It heals, it closes. And then what happens? It does become a scab. But now your body's going to do what? Say what? Okay, because it's healing, but what is it going to do to those blood cells? It's going to create more, right? So we're going to make more blood cells, okay? All right, so today as we go through this lesson, we are going to compare the cell to a factory. So just like a factory, a cell must have a source of energy, which is anybody for the cell? Anybody know what it's called? Energy for the cell? No. Good try. Begins with an M. Mitochondria, that's right. Okay. They also make products. They maintain, repair themselves, and grow. And they try to expand to new locations. So inside of a cell, what we're going to focus on today are organelles. So those are like our organs, but they're much smaller, obviously, inside of a cell. So they are specialized structures in cells that perform a specific function. So each organelle we talk about is going to look different, and therefore it has a different function. So the first one is the nucleus. Okay? The nucleus is the control center or the brain of the cell. So it is what tells the cell what it needs to do. This is also in a eukaryote where we find the cell's DNA or the instructions for the cell. Okay? So this would be the main office of the factory, because who would you typically find in the main office, even at a school? The boss or the principal, right? So this would be the main office of the factory, okay? Also, something else that you need to know, and you'll see this on your notes if you have them open, you need to know if we find them in a plant cell, an animal cell, or both. So the nucleus is found in eukaryotic cells, so we would find it where? Plant, animal, or both? Both, right. Okay, next is the cytoplasm. This is something else that you'll see in all cells. So even a prokaryotic cell will have cytoplasm. Okay, this is the portion of the cell that's outside of the nucleus. So we consider this a gel-like substance, and this is where chemical reactions take place. Okay, so in a factory, we would compare this to the air, because the air is all around, just like in a school. Okay, throughout the halls and the entire building. So cytoplasm, I just said, is in all cells. So do we find it in plant, animal, or both? Both. Okay. Next is a ribosome. You will also find these in all cells, both prokaryote and eukaryote, okay, because they are not a membrane-bound organelle. These are where proteins are assembled. Okay. So if you ever see protein synthesis, which we will talk about a while out from now, protein synthesis, okay, that relates to the ribosome, because that's where proteins are made. So these follow the directions from the nucleus, and this will make a lot more sense when we get into protein synthesis. But remember we talked about yesterday DNA and whether or not it can leave the nucleus, can it? No, why? And the DNA is too big, okay? So we have to take DNA and transcribe it into RNA, and that's the first part of protein synthesis. So DNA's message is what leaves the nucleus via RNA, and that takes it to the ribosome where a protein is then created, okay? So this would be like the assembly line in a factory, because what does an assembly line do? Build stuff, right? Okay. And then I've already said this is found in all cells, so plant, animal, or both. Also both. Okay, next one is a vacuole. The vacuole is a sac-like structure that stores materials such as water, salt, protein, and carbs. So this is like a storage facility, okay? In a vacuole, or not in a vacuole, I should say, a vacuole can be found in both plant and animal cells. But the difference is, in a plant cell, it's a large central vacuole, okay? In an animal cell, the vacuoles are a lot smaller. So you can see that up here on the board, okay? So we find it in plant, animal, or both. Both, but the difference is lot bigger in a plant cell, okay? So, like I said, that is like a storage closet in a factory because it is a storage facility. Next is the mitochondria. This is the powerhouse of the cell. Okay, so this is where we get the energy. So it converts the chemical energy that is stored in glucose, which is a what? A sugar, which is a what? Carbohydrate, yes? Okay, so this is stored in glucose, and then it puts it into a usable form, which is known as ATP. Has anybody ever heard that one? Seen it? Yes? You heard about it. Does anybody know what it stands for? You try. You guys, that's all right. ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. So tri means what? Tri? Three. So that means that there's 3 phosphates. Because we will talk about ADP, which is adenosine diphosphate, and di is 2, right? Okay. So the mitochondria, something else just to be somewhat familiar with is that it is enclosed by a double membrane, and we've already said that it is the powerhouse of the cell. So the factory's power source would be comparable to the mitochondria. Okay? Do we find this in plants, animals, or both? Both. Next is the chloroplast. Okay? This is the opposite of mitochondria. And we'll talk more about mitochondria and chloroplast when we get into photosynthesis and cellular respiration. But the chloroplast captures the energy from the sun, and then it stores it in bonds of glucose. So mitochondria, we're releasing energy, okay? But in a chloroplast, we're storing it. And like I said, this will come into play more when we get into photosynthesis and respiration. So chloroplasts are what do photosynthesis. So photosynthesis takes place in the chloroplast. They also contain green pigment, which is what makes a plant green. And that green pigment is known as chlorophyll. Okay? So obviously I've been talking a lot about a what kind of cell? A plant cell. So are these found in animal cells? No, just a plant cell. Okay? And we would compare this to the factory's solar panel. Because solar means we're doing what? So, but to be solar, you have to get light from the sun, right? All right, next is the cell membrane, and yesterday I mentioned that this can also be called the plasma membrane. You may see it either way, so just know that they are the same thing. This is the outer border of every cell, and it controls what enters and exits the cell. Okay, so last week, y'all weren't here, but I drew something not quite this complex, but a small version of it on the board. So this is known as a phospholipid bilayer. So it's made up of what macromolecule? Phospholipid bilayer. Lipids. Okay? So if we remember back to lipids, just a few days ago, lipids make up the cell membrane. Okay? And we'll talk more about this when we get to the cell membrane in a few days. Okay? So this is comparable to the factory security guards because they are who allow things in and out of the factory. Okay? So cell membrane, we said we find it in what kind of cells? In all cells. So for this case, since we're just talking specifically eukaryotes, it would be found in both plants and animals. Okay? All right, next is the cell wall. The cell wall is the tough outermost layer of a plant cell, and this is what provides support and protection for the cell. Okay, so remember that it is found outside of the cell membrane in a plant cell. okay? So outside of the cell membrane in a plant cell. And it's made of what? Cellulose. And I talked about that when I talked about macromolecules. So what macromolecule is cellulose? A what?
Carbohydrate.
A carbohydrate, okay? Because it is a what? A sugar, because sugars end in ose, okay? So these are found in what kind of cell? Only a plant, okay? And we would compare this to the factory's brick wall. So up here, just some differences that we need to know between a plant and an animal cell. Plant cells are typically what shape? Rectangular, square, right? And animal cells are what? Circular, okay? Also need to know that plant cells have a cell wall, animal cells do not. And where do we find the cell wall in a plant? Outside of the what? Cell membrane, that's right, okay? We also need to know that they have a chloroplast and they have a much larger
Shell. Oh, vacuole.
a much larger vacuole, okay? So animal cells still have a vacuole, but they're much smaller. Plants have a large central vacuole. That's known for storage, okay? Any questions? All right. What is that? It is a plant cell. What's it pointing to? A vacuole. Cell wall. It is an organelle, mitochondria. Who said mitochondria? Good job. Yep, chloroplast. The best way to remember that if you ever see a colorful picture, a chloroplast is always going to be green. Okay. Nucleus. Okay.
So
Point to that little dot. Ribosome, okay? And something that I did not mention earlier, but ribosomes, okay? You'll find them one of two places. They can either be freely floating in the cytoplasm throughout the cell, or they are attached to what is known as the rough ER, the rough endoplasmic reticulum, and those are what make it rough, because the ribosomes are bumps on the reticulum. All right, which two organelles are only found in plant cells? Yes. And a cell wall. That's right, chloroplast and cell wall. Because even though they have a vacuole, what did we say about an animal cell?
it's not as big.
It's just not as big. That's right. Okay. Which organelle contains the cell's DNA or instructions? The nucleus. Which organelle regulates what enters and leaves the cell? The cell membrane, that's right. Okay? And it's made of what macromolecule? Lipids, the phospholipid bilayer. We'll also talk about some other macromolecules that are found in there as well. Where would a plant cell store the sugars it makes during photosynthesis? The chloroplast. No. The vacuole, because what's the key word up there? Store sugar. Which organelle performs photosynthesis? That's the chloroplast, okay? So photosynthesis is chloroplast, storage is vacuole. So think of a vacuum. What does a vacuum do?
Suck.
It sucks up stuff, right? Okay? And until you empty it, it stores it. Okay? All right. Does anybody have questions? Yay, nay? We're good? You good? You're quiet. as yesterday, okay, most of you I saw filling in your notes. You have a worksheet, an ed puzzle, and make sure you fill out on your notes. Do I have the comparison attached there? So you're just gonna obviously do it on your own, but what you'll do for that portion, so I don't have 50 million questions, you can't use a factory because we already did that, right? So you need to compare it to something. So pick something like a school. You can pick a shopping mall. I've had students in the past compare it to a purse, okay? But you need to be able to pick one thing and then compare all the pieces to that one thing under each organelle. Does that make sense? Don't pick something different for each organelle. So pick one big thing, and then all the small things that are part of that one big thing is what will come underneath. Does that make sense? Yes? Are you sure?